from Luke's 21st chapter. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Then he told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is already near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Be on guard so that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life, and that day does not catch you unexpectedly like a trap. For it will come upon all those who live on the face of the whole earth. Be alert at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape these things that will take place, and to stand before the Son of Man. Thanks be to God.
Friends, pray with me. O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations in all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight. Amen. There are parts of the Bible I'd just rather not deal with. The hard parts, like love your enemies. That's hard. Or these strange apocalyptic passages. I almost never preach from books like Daniel or Ezekiel or Revelation. I was never interested in figuring out who the 4 horsemen were. Or who really is the Antichrist anyway. As a child, I remember that our next door neighbor was very concerned about the second coming and wanted me to give my heart to Jesus in a very specific way, because I already went to church. And it was so important to him because he was very clear. His family all argued about when the Russians were going to come and take over the United States and the world would end and Jesus would come and rapture and take his own, and the rest of us would be stuck in hell with the Russians and atheists and Unitarians and several schismatic Baptists. I've always been a bit of an optimist because I think the human race is somehow going to muddle through, maybe even to when the sun burns out in about 5.5 billion years. I'm even enough of an optimist that we might transcend that till 22 billion years when the universe expands to the spaces that it begins to be too cold to support life. So we have a lot of time left, and I feel like then let's get busy right here, right now, because like it or not, this is the world we have and we're all in it together. Who knows what Jesus meant when he said, "You'll see the Son of Man coming in the clouds," as our verse says in Luke today. He also said, "Wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them." So maybe he's already present in a certain way. I often wondered, those who focus so much on the second coming of Jesus, did they have a problem with the first time? Wasn't it enough? I mean, he taught us things we're still struggling to live into and understand. We don't have this love your neighbor thing really down yet, right? What more could he do than teach and be crucified and risen from the dead? Still, each gospel gives us one chapter to Jesus having this kind of, they call it the little apocalypse, where he delivers this strange thing. There will be signs in the stars, and the waters will roar, and the people will be so distressed they will faint with fear. Sounds like the evening news. And And I preach on it because I'm afraid if I avoid it, if I avoid the hard places in the Bible, then I'm just really making up my own religion for my own comfort. So I try to take it all on. So what does Jesus want us to watch? What does he want us to see? What should we be looking at? I want to reframe a bit what apocalypse means. We often think of it, it's the end times, it's terrible, and there's fire and brimstone and so on, but that's not exactly it. You know, some apocalyptic parts of the Bible say the lion shall lie down with the lamb. Swords and shields shall be beaten into plowshares and pruning hooks, so it can be hopeful as well. It's usually written to people in terrible situations who have almost given up hope. They're in exile. They're in the midst of war. There's famine. There's COVID. There's things going on that people are worried about, and that is what these passages are written for. Sometimes judgment on those who caused the problems and hope to those who need to be liberated. You might think of Mary's Magnificat, which we're going to look at later in Advent. You know, Mary was pretty radical. She said, you know, the lowly will be lifted up, the kings will be thrown down, the poor shall have good things they shall eat, and the rich shall go away hungry. And she clearly said this as good news. Depends on where you're standing if you think it's good news or doom, right? So, as we think about apocalypse, it doesn't really mean disaster. Think of it more like a specific kind of literary genre of the Bible. Like, you know the difference between science fiction and romance, right? You have very different expectations of those two kinds of literature. You know the difference between reading Isaac Asimov and I don't even know who romance writers are, but you know the difference, right? So the word apocalypse in Greek, apocalypsis means an uncovering. It means an unveiling, that suddenly you see a truth that maybe you didn't want to see, but here it is. It's exposed. There was a secret. It could be corruption or injustice. It could be a family secret that we really didn't want out there, or just the things we hide from ourselves, the things we put into the shadow and we don't really want to deal with, but then it's opened up, unveiled. The truth shall make you free, right? Some truth you're not sure how free you really want to be when you hear it. So we can think of things that are unveiled, apocalyptic moments, in a way like the Me Too movement was apocalyptic. Certainly, sexual harassment and abuse had been prevalent for years and still is, but there was a moment when powerful men like Harvey Weinstein and Charlie Rose were held accountable. And women were empowered to tell their story and not be ashamed of it and say, this happened to me, it's real, and there has to be truth, and there has to be a reckoning, and it was a very hard thing. It still is a very hard thing, it's still playing out, and yet it's brought some changes in law, in social custom, in workplace rules, that it was apocalyptic, a truth-telling, an unveiling. Oh, COVID is certainly apocalyptic. It's unveiled so much, right? We learned how quickly our healthcare system could break down, where all of the gaps were. We discovered which workers were truly essential. Nurses, sales clerks, firefighters, first responders, people that we didn't pay all that much attention to, truck drivers that move things around, and just all of these things. We realized how important these jobs were. And a lot of people realized they didn't like their job, and they quit. And they went and did something else. And we realize that many people don't trust science, don't trust the government, don't want to be vaccinated. In fact, I think anything that was outmoded, vulnerable, anything that was out of balance and not really working, that COVID revealed it. And now it's there and we have to deal with it. And we don't know what good might come in its place. Maybe this is the time when we realize that we all have to come together, that we're all in this and we have to try to change the direction that we've been moving in. I don't know. We're still in the midst of it in what? The fourth wave of this particular apocalypse? I hope we get more out of it than we all learned how to use Zoom and, better Netflix movies, right? It's not easy to live like this. I noticed in the news this week there were several stories that came out that there's a lot of concern about burnout. That 2/3 of workers are experiencing strong signs of burnout today because of all the challenges. And so there's a lot of talk of self-care and resilience, which is important, but I'm not sure I can self-care my way through the apocalypse, right? It's hard to stay engaged through so much. Hard to watch the news. I'm a big news watcher. I was a journalism major. I worked for public radio, so I usually take in a lot of news, and I found I have to step back. Too much. Do you know what doom scrolling is? Right? You're on your phone, you're going through, oh no, look at that. It's like watching a horror movie, right? You just can't stop, and you go through, and it's like watching Saturday Night Live right now. It's all doom and cynicism, right? And I have to stop. And I have to back off, and I have to look for hope. Hope, I've heard that. Our scripture today, right? Watch. Pay attention. Hope. When these troubles come and others are fainting with fear, lift up your heads, for your redemption is near. That's about hope, right? How do we find this place of hope? This place where we're not avoiding reality, right? I'm not hopeful when I avoid reality, but that I can be constructively and engaged in a way that's still life-giving and not cynical and burned out. So here's where the duck story comes in, right? You may have seen in the title, if you saw the email, like watch like a duck. So here's the duck story. So last summer, Jean and I went to Popham Beach to relax a few days. And if you've been to Popham, you know that there's an island about a quarter mile off the beach. And during low tide, this land bridge is uncovered, unveiled. And for a few hours, you can walk out on the land bridge and go out to this wonderful little island with these steep cliffs. And as the tide comes in, the surf begins to pound on it, right? And I went and I sat up close to the high point just to watch the ocean, and I needed to reflect. I was brooding, actually. I'd actually just had 2 straight 3-day job interviews, including one here, and I had a third one lined up. And so I just needed to sit and think, what does God want from me right now? And what a better place to watch and the waves come in, just that feeling, that depth of the ocean. And then it'd splash up on the rocks, and as the tide comes in, it was splashing higher, and it was like 30-foot waves, up in the air. And, all the tourists got a little too close and they got their iPhones wet, and I could kind of notice how I'm saying the tourists are others. Now, I'm not a tourist in Maine. I may not be a Mainer yet, but I'm not a tourist. So I'm watching all this, and here comes this line of ducks, the little black ducks. And they're swimming along from the quiet waters over sort of on the cove, and they're coming right into the choppy waters, and they're swimming right across the edge of the cliff. And I thought, oh no, did they take a wrong turn? Are they getting sucked into a riptide and they're going to be dashed up against the rocks? I was really worried about these ducks. And they're swimming along just in a very straight row. You know how ducks are, right? They're like swimming along. There's about 8 of them, just like a little marching along in the water. And they come right across. I mean, they seem to know what they're doing. And they're swimming right at that point before when the waves are really rising, right? And then they rise to that point, and then they crash into the rocks. And the ducks are at that point. And so as the wave goes up, they're going, whoa! And the waves, as they go out, they're like coming back down in the same place in the water. So they're going up and down, and I'm getting seasick, like just watching them. Like I'm thinking, what a ride! And they're coming along, and suddenly they all go boop, and they dive. Like, where'd they go? And they don't come up. And they don't come up. And it's like 20, 25 seconds go by, and then suddenly they're there. Boop, boop, boop. They all come up, all 8 of them. And I watch them for about 20 minutes, and they're working that edge, right? They're working that edge in pairs, and I realize, oh, it's lunchtime. What a way to make a living, right? Right there at that crest of disaster is and this must be adaptive behavior, right? They must know over generations that this is the best place to feed when the tide starts to come in and the waves crash and everything's being stirred up, and here come the ducks, and they're just going to scoop it all up. I mean, leave it to a duck to make something so dangerous and difficult look so darn easy. And I'm watching this, and suddenly, like, a spiritual message sort of comes to me. And this is kind of how it works for me. Like, if I have an epiphany, it's often because I'm out, I'm looking at something in creation, and I'm watching it, and just sort of taking it in, and then suddenly, oh, I know what I need to know. It's like Richard Rohr says that nature is the first Bible that we read. And that's very true for me. So, anyway, I'm watching all this, and the message is don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the dangerous places. Don't be afraid of moving to the edge. In fact, where you need to be is right at that point, just outside the danger, where everything's churning, where everything's being unveiled. Be there and see. Be there and be ready. I thought, yeah, wherever I go, that's the message for me. It's a good message for the church right now, is can we find that edge? That place that's just out of danger, but close enough that we know what's happening, where God is working. And yes, sometimes we need, like the 23rd Psalm, we need still waters and self-care and safe harbors. But there's real spiritual work that comes right at the edge of the rocks and the splash, where we have to dive like a duck. So you may wonder now, okay, Todd, if that was the lesson, then why did you pick Boothbay Harbor? Summer vacation land, right? In fact, one person asked me if I had come to my retirement job. And I was actually very incensed on your behalf, right? Because there's rocky places everywhere. There are difficult edges where we need to grow wherever we go. And as I think about, as my call emerges here, it's all wrapped up with you now. As we figure this out together. And I think this is a really great place to do this work. It's a great place because Here we are, we're surrounded by just great beauty, awe and wonder. And at the same time, we know that the climate emergency, it's going to impact us in significant ways that we may not even understand yet. So how can we take our love of the coves and of regattas and sailing, how can we translate that love into a passion for our planet? We live here in a very purple state. How can we find that place amidst the turbulence and the crashing waves where we can play a role in healing the divides that are tearing us apart? We know of a national housing crisis, and that it's right here too on our peninsula. Young people often don't stay because there's just no place to live, not enough opportunity. The people that make this peninsula work increasingly can't afford to live here. They have to live somewhere else. What can we do in the midst of this crisis? Many have succumbed to the opioid epidemic. How can we be a beacon of hope in the midst of this? This is an aging community. We're an aging church. I'm aging. What legacy, especially for the retired generation, do you want to leave for the coming generations? What's left to be done, the important work of God in this place? Right here is the perfect place for Advent, to watch, to pay attention, to come to that place so that we may see how is God at work in the world, how is the Spirit moving right here, right now, among us. There's great beauty and wonder here. There is great suffering here. So lift up your heads. Lift up and watch and see. Behold, our redemption is near, as the scriptures say. Be not afraid, because in all of this, God is near us. Amen.
Amen.